Reed heard a muffled sound from the locked barn. He pressed his ear against the oak planks. A trembling, guttural voice came through. "Please, break the lock, I beg you." He kicked it open. The smell of mold, sweat, and blood hit him. In the dark, a tall orc female was tied to a post, leather vest torn. Her black eyes burned into his. "Take me with you. I will bear your warriors. Just save me." The rain came down in sheets across the iron frontier, turning the dirt roads into rivers of red mud. Reed stood frozen in the barn doorway for exactly 1 heartbeat, staring at the orc female tied to the post. Images flashed through his mind without warning, his farm burning, his wife pale and still on the bed, his son's small hand going cold in his. He had been helpless then. He would not be helpless now. He pulled the iron knife from his belt and crossed the floor in 3 long strides. The hemp ropes were thick and rough, and they fought the blade, but he sawed through them steadily. The orc female, tall, powerfully built, with deep green skin marked by old scars, watched every movement of his hands. She did not flinch. She did not speak. She simply waited. When the last rope fell away, she straightened to her full height. She towered over him by nearly a head. Her knuckles were cracked and bleeding. Her leather vest hung in strips. Even so, there was nothing fragile about her. Her jaw was set hard as iron stone, and her black eyes held the look of someone who had survived things Reed could not imagine. "Can you walk?" he asked. She answered by taking a step forward. From the far end of the village corridor came the sound of boots on wet stone and men shouting over the downpour. "They went this way! Check the barn!" The voices bounced off the rock walls of the little settlement of Marek, growing closer fast. Reed grabbed her wrist and pulled. "Back door, now!" They moved through the shadows between the stalls, past the smell of hay and frightened horses, and out through a low rear door into the rain. The wooden transport cart sat in the mud where Reed had left it, his draft horse standing patient and soaked beside it. He threw himself onto the driver's board and snatched up the reins. She vaulted up beside him without being told. Reed cracked the leather reins hard, and the horse lurched forward, wheels cutting deep into the mud. The cart groaned and swayed as it picked up speed along the back trail that curved south toward the Thornwood passes. Behind them, a shout went up from the barn. A lantern swung wildly in the dark. Men were running. Reed did not look back. He kept his eyes on the narrow trail ahead, reading the shadows the way old frontier soldiers learned to read them. Every shape a possible ambush, every sound a possible threat. The rain helped. It swallowed noise and blurred torchlight and turned the world behind them into nothing but grey curtain. Beside him, the orc female sat straight, her large hands gripping the cart rail with white-knuckled force. She was breathing hard, but controlled. Whoever she was, she had discipline. She knew how to keep herself steady when everything around her was breaking apart. They rode in silence for a long time. The lights of Marek disappeared behind the hills. Reed exhaled slowly. He did not know her name. He did not know what she had done or who was hunting her or why they had been willing to hold her in a barn in a village full of people. He only knew that whatever she had offered him in that dark room, he had not agreed to it. He had cut her loose because leaving her there would have made him something he refused to become. Still, there was a feeling that settled in beside the cold and the mud and the rain, something old and quiet that he had not felt in years. He was not alone on this road tonight. A mile out, through a break in the rain, he caught a flash of something strange at the tree line, a pale shape standing perfectly still between the pines, watching them pass. When he blinked, it was gone. He told himself it was a deer, but somewhere in his chest, a buried instinct said otherwise. He would think about it later. Right now, the sound of crossbow bolts splitting the wet air behind him made the decision for him. The first bolt struck the cart's rear panel with a sound like a fist hitting wet wood. The second skimmed Reed's shoulder and vanished into the dark ahead. He dropped flat against the driver's board and cracked the reins again, pushing the draft horse as fast as it dared on the slick trail. The orc female had already shifted position. She was crouched low at the back of the cart, one hand gripping the rail, her dark eyes tracking the pursuing riders with the calm precision of a predator reading prey. She counted them fast, 4, maybe 5 mounted men, and said nothing. She simply reached down and pulled a chipped bone dagger from inside her torn vest. Reed had not even known she was carrying it. "Keep them on the right trail," she ordered. He did not question her. He steered left, sending the cart onto a narrower path that curved sharply around the base of a rock shelf. The wheels skidded. The horse screamed but held the turn. Behind them, one of the riders overcorrected and his horse hit the wet rock face with a hollow crash, and then the man's shout cut off abruptly. 4 then. The trail descended fast toward the river canyon. Reed knew this land. He had crossed it a dozen times in his frontier years, back when he had still believed the Iron Frontier offered something worth fighting for. The log crossing over the Tescan River was narrow and built on old rope and post foundations that shifted with every flood season. A heavy cart would make it groan. But it would hold. The 3 remaining pursuers were gaining. Their horses were lighter and faster on the open trail. Another bolt struck the cart's left wheel, spoke, and Reed heard wood crack. "How far to the crossing?" she called over the wind. "Half a mile." She nodded once and pulled herself to the front of the cart, crouching just behind Reed's shoulder. Her body blocked the wind from hitting him directly, and he realized she was positioning herself as a shield without being asked. The river appeared below them, black and fast and swollen with rainwater. The crossing bridge was barely wide enough for the cart. Reed guided the horse onto the planks and felt the whole structure sway and dip under the weight. The horse's hooves clattered and slipped, but the animal trusted him enough to push forward. They reached the other side. Reed pulled the reins hard and brought the cart to a stop in the shadows of the canyon wall. He turned and looked back. The 3 riders had pulled up at the far bank. Their horses refused the bridge. One man dismounted and tested the boards with his boot. The wood flexed dangerously. They would not follow tonight. Not in the dark. Not on that crossing. The orc female watched them from the shadows beside Reed, her breathing finally beginning to slow. Her chest rose and fell in long, deliberate pulls. She tucked the bone dagger back into the hidden sheath beneath her vest, and then she was still. "They'll find a way around before morning," she said. "I know," Reed answered. He turned the cart south along the canyon floor, moving deeper into the narrow corridor of rock and shadow that would take them toward the Thornwood passes. The rain was easing. The sound of the river filled the silence between them. She still had not told him her name. He still had not asked. The Thornwood Canyon closed in around them as the night deepened, walls of dark stone pressing close on both sides, the trail barely wide enough for the cart. Reed guided the horse slowly now, navigating by the thin strip of cloud-covered sky, above and by memory. He had camped in these passages before, years ago, when he had still ridden scout routes along the northern marks. He found the ledge hollow he was looking for near the second bend, a wide shelf cut into the rock by an old river channel, deep enough to hide the cart and the horse from anyone on the trail above. He pulled the reins, and the horse stepped gratefully into the shelter. "Down!" Reed said, setting the brake. The orc female climbed off the cart without a sound. She moved around the perimeter of the hollow instantly, checking every angle and shadow with the trained economy of someone who had spent years surviving ambushes. Reed watched her work and said nothing. When she was satisfied, she came back to the center and stood, arms folded over her broad chest, studying him in the dark. He untied the horse and began removing the harness. His hands worked by feel. "They will not ride this trail in the dark," he said. "The mercenaries know Thornwood. They will go around the long way and try to cut us off at the western flat come morning. Then we have until dawn." "Yes." He tied the horse to a pine root growing from the rock wall and pulled dry kindling from the cart's supply box. Wrapped in oilskin, kept dry for exactly this kind of night. He had learned to always pack dry wood when he lived on the Iron Frontier. That lesson had saved his life more than once. He built the fire small and shielded by rock. The flame caught and threw a low, warm circle of orange across the stone floor. The orc female sat down across from it, maintaining a careful distance from Reed, not afraid of him, but not yet ready to close the gap. She pulled her legs under her and wrapped her arms around her knees. In the firelight, the old scars on her arms stood pale against the deep green of her skin. Her knuckles were still bleeding in 2 places. Reed pulled his water canteen from his belt and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. Then she took it. She drank in measured sips, the way people drink when they have gone without water long enough to know better than to rush it. Then she handed it back. "My name is Takina," she said. Her voice was low and textured, each consonant shaped carefully by a mouth built for a different language. "Reed," he said. She nodded slowly, as though filing the name away in some private account. He unstuffed a strip of dried meat from his coat pocket and broke it in half, offering 1 piece across the fire. She took it without hesitation this time. They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled. Somewhere above, wind moved through the pine crowns with a sound like distant water. The horse shifted and exhaled slowly. Reed stared at the flames and thought about the pale shape he had seen at the tree line outside Marek. He said nothing about it, but the image sat inside him, patient and still, like something waiting for the right moment to be understood. Takina finished the dried meat and gazed into the fire with her jaw set and her eyes steady. Whatever she was thinking, it did not reach her face. The hollow was quiet and hidden and cold, and it was, for the moment, safe. That was enough. Reed cleaned the cuts on his hands with a scrap of cloth from his coat, and then turned his attention to Takina's wrists. The rope marks were deep, red grooves in the green skin that had been there long enough to swell. In the firelight, he could see the early signs of infection beginning around the edges. He had seen that before, on the frontier, on men who had been shackled for days before anyone found them. He pulled a small kit from the cart, the kind every frontier farmer learned to carry, and knelt beside her without asking. She watched his hands but did not pull back. "This will hurt," he said. "Everything hurts," she answered. He cleaned the wounds carefully, working the cloth into the grooves to pull out the grit and dried blood. She made no sound, not one. Her breathing did not even change. When he was done cleaning, he wrapped both wrists in strips of linen, tying the knots firm but not tight. When he looked up, she was watching his face. "You did not accept my offer," she said. He sat back on his heels. "No." "Why?" Reed was quiet for a moment. He pushed a stick deeper into the fire and watched the flame respond. Because a person in a rope is not someone you make a deal with. They're someone you cut loose. Takina held his gaze. Her expression did not change, but something behind it shifted, like a wall with a crack in it. "My clans do not work that way," she said. "Neither does mine when it's working right." Another silence. The fire popped. The horse huffed from the darkness. She reached down and touched the edge of the linen wrapping on her right wrist with 2 fingers, testing it. Then she put her hands back in her lap. "I was taken from my clan in the northern marks when I was young," she said. "Mercenaries. The same kind of men who were behind us tonight. They sold me to a mining camp in the Iron Frontier, then sold me again, 3 camps in 8 years. She said it the way people report facts they have had a long time to make peace with, or a long time to hate. He could not tell which. "My sister," she continued, "tried to run. They killed her for it." She paused. "I swore on the blood of my ancestors that no rope would ever hold me again. Tonight was the first time they had managed to take me in 4 years. Reed nodded. He did not offer sympathy. He had learned, on the frontier, that some things do not want sympathy. They want to be heard. So he listened. "And you?" she asked. He stared at the fire. "Wife died of fever. Son followed her. Farm burned in a raid the winter after. Been rebuilding alone since." She said nothing. He said nothing. The silence between them was the kind that did not need filling. Above the canyon, far away, a wolf called once into the dark sky. Another answered it from a different ridge. And then the night went quiet again, and the fire burned down to a red, steady glow. Reed settled his back against the cartwheel, his rifle across his lap. He did not intend to sleep. But the weight of the night began pressing down, and his eyes grew heavy. He did not notice when sleep took him. He woke to the distant sound of hoofbeats on stone. Reed was on his feet before he was fully awake, rifle already leveled, body pressing flat against the rock wall beside the hollow entrance. Beside him, Takina was already crouched and still. She had heard it before him. Her bone dagger was in her hand. The sound came from the trail above, not below. One set of hoofbeats, moving slowly, searching. They listened. The sound moved east along the upper ledge, paused for a long moment directly above their position, then continued east until it faded. Reed did not move until he could no longer hear anything at all. Then he pressed his boot into the coals to kill the last of the fire's glow. "Scout," Takina said quietly. "Captain Peter doesn't waste a full team on night trails," Reed agreed. "He sends one man to check the likely positions and report back at dawn. Then we move before dawn." He looked at the sky through the canyon opening. The clouds had thinned enough to show the stars in patches. He judged them at 2 hours before first light. They broke camp without speaking much. Reed re-harnessed the horse, while Takina packed the supply box and checked the cartwheel that had taken the crossbow bolt. The spoke was cracked but holding. It would last another half day if he kept the speed down. They rolled out of the hollow slowly, wheels muffled by the wet ground, and took the South Fork, the longer route through the lower canyon, rather than the more direct western trail where any scout would expect them to appear at dawn. The morning came in cold and grey, light seeping between the rock walls without warmth. Takina rode in the back of the cart with her back against the sideboard, watching the trail behind them. Reed kept his eyes forward. Around mid-morning, they cleared the canyon and emerged onto the open plain that stretched south toward his land. The farmhouse appeared in the distance at midday, dark timber walls, a pole fence, a water tank, and a small stock shed. It looked exactly as he had left it, worn down, stubborn, still standing. He felt something when he saw it, the way a man feels when he comes back to a thing he has almost lost too many times to count. "This is yours?" Takina asked. "What's left of it?" he said. She studied it without expression as they rolled through the gate. Then she climbed down from the cart and walked the perimeter of the fence line without being asked, checking the posts, looking for weak points. Her eyes moved with the focus of someone who has always had to evaluate exits before anything else. Reed began unhitching the horse. By the time he was done, she had already identified the 2 gaps in the northern fence that would need reinforcing. He did not say thank you. She did not expect it. They simply began to work. That night, as Reed checked the barn latch before turning in, he paused. Somewhere beyond the northern tree line, at the edge of where the lantern light died, something stood still in the dark. Pale, motionless, watching the farm the way a sentinel watches a fire. He stared at it for a long moment, his hand tight on the lantern handle. When a cloud moved across the moon and the shadow shifted, it was gone. He went inside without mentioning it to Takina. Some things needed more time before they could be spoken aloud. 3 days passed in labor and silence and the slow accumulation of small trusts. They repaired the northern fence together, with Takina driving the posts with her bare hands, while Reed stretched the old wire taut and hammered the braces. She could do in one push what would have taken him a full morning with a mallet. He did not comment on it. She did not show off. They simply worked until the fence was solid and then moved to the next task. She helped him clear the dry brush around the farmhouse walls, a fire risk he had let grow too long. During the years he had stopped caring much about what burned and what did not. She moved through the brush with efficiency, hauling whole sections of it away from the structure in armloads that would have taken Reed 2 trips. At night, they sat on the porch. Him cleaning his repeating rifle, her sharpening her lance tip under the oil lantern. The silence between them had changed its character. It was no longer the silence of strangers watching each other for threats. It had become the practical silence of 2 people who had agreed, without saying so, to share the work of surviving. On the 4th day, the wire on the northern fence pulled too tight and snapped back. The edge caught Reed's right wrist, a clean, fast cut that sent blood running down his palm before he could react. Takina was beside him in 3 steps. She took his hand in both of hers. Her grip was careful. She turned his wrist to see the cut, and then, without a word, tore a strip from the hem of her leather skirt and wound it around the wound. Her fingers were thick and scarred, but they moved with a precision that surprised him. When she finished, she did not let go immediately. He looked up and found her already looking at him. Not at the wound, but at him. The firelight from the evening lantern caught the edge of her jaw and the line of her brow, and for a moment the frontier fell away entirely. The kiss was not planned by either of them. It was simply what happened next. Slow and quiet, tasting of smoke and cold air and the particular exhaustion of people who have been working hard together. When it ended, neither of them pulled away. "I did not expect this," Takina said. Her voice was lower than usual. "Neither did I," Reed said. They stood in the last light of the evening until the stars began to appear over the northern marks, and then they went inside. That night, Reed slept without dreaming for the first time in years. It was the dog that woke him. The old hound had never been a loud animal, a quiet, careful creature that Reed had kept through 2 hard winters when most of the other animals had died. When it let out a low, sustained whine in the darkness before dawn, Reed was on his feet with the rifle before his eyes were fully open. He found Takina already at the window, motionless, watching the yard. In the grey pre-dawn dark, 5 riders had appeared at the farm gate. They sat their horses with the practiced stillness of men who knew how to arrive somewhere without losing the initiative. Their leather armor was trail-worn. Their revolvers hung at their hips. The man at the front had a thick beard and the kind of flat, patient expression that belongs to someone who has collected debts for a living. Captain Peter. Reed recognized him from the wanted papers that passed through frontier settlements, a man who had made himself useful to the mining camps and the slave traders of the Iron Frontier for the better part of 2 decades. A collector, a finder of things that had been hidden from people who paid well to have them found again. Reed stepped onto the porch. "I hear a farmer's been sheltering a fugitive orc," Peter called. His voice carried easily in the cold morning air. "Hand her over, and we ride on. Simple as that." Reed held the rifle at his side, not raised, not lowered. "Nobody on this property belongs to anyone else." Peter smiled without warmth. "We paid good silver for her in the Iron Frontier. She's property, same as any horse or mule. You're just borrowing what belongs to us." "She's not property," Reed said, "and you're not coming in." One of the men behind Peter spat in the mud. "You're a fool, farmer," Peter said. "We'll be back with more men, and when we come back, this farm burns." He pulled his horse around, and the 5 riders disappeared back down the road in a thunder of hooves and kicked up mud. Reed stood on the porch and watched them go. The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape to it, the shape of something building. Takina came to stand beside him. "How many will he bring?" she asked. "As many as he can buy," Reed said. "A dozen, maybe more. He won't come back small. He'll come back to finish it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Then we have 1 day to prepare." Reed nodded. He looked out at the farm, the fence they had fixed, the brush they had cleared, the water tank, the stock shed, the earth they had both worked with their hands. He thought about burning. He thought about losing everything again. Then he thought about staying. "Let's get to work," he said. They spent the rest of the day turning the farm into something that could survive a hard assault. Reed filled grain sacks with dirt and stacked them at the windows, 3 deep on each sill, enough to stop a rifle round. He reinforced the front door with 2 crossbeams of oak that he had been saving for a fence repair. He checked every shutter, every hinge, every bolt. The farmhouse was not a fortress, but it had solid bones, and he knew how to use every angle. Takina worked on the outside. She mapped a retreat route through the back fence line and dug a series of shallow pit traps along the eastern approach, concealed under cut brush and thin boards, just deep enough to bring a horse down if it stepped wrong in the dark. She moved fast and efficiently, covering a wide area before the light began to fade. That night, around the 3rd hour of darkness, Reed woke to the sound of her moving. He found her in the yard, a packed leather bag in her hand, moving quietly toward the back gate. "Stop," he said. She stopped. She stood with her back to him for a long moment, her broad shoulders set hard. Then she turned. Her eyes were bright and wet in the moonlight, not weakness, but the kind of fury that lives close to grief. "If I stay, you lose everything," she said. "This farm, your life. Everything you have left." Reed walked toward her through the cold mud. "You think I rebuilt this place to watch it burn while I still had a choice about it?" "You do not know what you are choosing," she said. "My blood is cursed. Everyone who stands near me long enough pays for it." He stopped in front of her. He was half a head shorter than her and 20 years older, and he had buried his wife and his son and his old life. And he was still here, still on this ground, still upright. "Put the bag down," he said. She looked at him for a long time. The bag hit the mud with a heavy sound. He reached up and took her face in both his hands, scarred farmer's hands against her green jaw, and held on. She put her forehead against his and closed her eyes, and for a while the frontier night held still around them, as if the wind and the stone and the dark had agreed to wait. "Together," he said. She exhaled slowly. "Together," she said. They went back inside and did not speak much after that, but the house felt different, not larger or safer, but occupied in a way it had not been for a very long time. Before dawn, Reed sat by the window with his rifle and watched the road. Takina slept with her lance across her chest and her hand on the bone dagger, and she slept the way warriors sleep, completely and ready. The sky was the color of old blood when they came. 13 riders crested the hill at the edge of Reed's property at first light, moving in a tight group with Captain Peter at the front. They spread out as they hit the flat ground before the farm gate, fanning into a line the way experienced fighters do when they want to eliminate angles of escape. Peter did not call out a warning this time. The first shots came with the dawn. Glass shattered in the front window. A chunk of door frame exploded into splinters. Reed returned fire from behind the grain sacks, working the lever of his repeating rifle in a steady rhythm, not fast, not wild, but measured. One man went down from his horse at the gate, then another at the fence line. Takina came out the back. She did not hide. She moved along the outside wall of the farmhouse in a low run, lance in hand, and hit the eastern flank where 2 of Peter's men were trying to loop around toward the stock shed. The first man did not see her until she was already past him. The second one raised his revolver, and she took it from him with one hand and put him on the ground with the other. She moved the way she had been trained, through them, not at them, using momentum and positioning rather than brute collision. One of the pit traps collapsed under a horse's front legs. The rider went over the animal's head and did not get up. Reed caught a graze from a revolver shot along his left side, a line of fire across his ribs that he did not fully register until the smell of burnt cloth reached him. He kept firing. 3 of Peter's men broke and rode back the way they had come. Peter himself made it to the porch. He came over the railing fast, knife drawn, and got Reed's elbow across the jaw before he could use it. The knife went into the floorboards. Reed got a hand around Peter's collar and put him hard against the porch post, and when Peter tried to come up with his fists, he found Takina behind him, one massive forearm across his throat. Peter went still. The remaining mercenaries, Seeing their captain held and 5 of their number down, pulled their horses around and rode. The sound of hoofbeats faded fast across the plain, diminishing until the frontier silence absorbed them completely. Reed stood on the porch, with his hand pressed to his ribs and blood on his knuckles, and the dry, particular smell of gunpowder smoke settling across the yard. Takina held Peter for a long moment. Then she looked at Reed. He shook his head once. She let Peter go. The man staggered, touched his throat, and looked around at the yard. The men down, the horses scattered, the farm still standing against every intention he had brought with him. Something in his face collapsed quietly, the way a man looks when he finally understands that a thing he wanted is simply gone. He walked slowly to where his horse had wandered near the gate, climbed into the saddle with the stiff effort of someone newly broken, and rode away without looking back. Reed watched him go with the eyes of a man who had spent enough years on the frontier to know the difference between a threat retreating and a threat defeated. Peter would not be back. The farm was quiet. A hawk turned slow circles in the pale morning sky. Takina came to Reed on the porch. She looked at his side, the graze along the ribs, and pressed her hand over his without asking. He let her. They stood like that for a while, looking out across the property, the damaged fence, the broken window, the churned earth of the yard, where horses had turned and men had fallen. It was still standing. He was still standing. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "That means you are still here." He laughed, a short, rough sound, surprised out of him. She did not smile exactly, but something moved in her expression that came close. They sat on the porch steps together as the morning grew around them, the sun pulling itself above the northern marks and throwing long shadows across the plain. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from the chimney behind them. The horse was grazing calmly near the water tank. The dog had come out and was lying in a patch of sun near the gate, unconcerned now. After a while, Takina said, "I have not stayed in one place this long since my clan." "How long does it feel?" Reed asked. She thought about it. "Like something I did not know I was missing." He did not answer. He did not need to. They had both come to this place through roads that had taken everything from them. Somewhere out on the frontier, in the mining camps, in the burned farms, in the years of loneliness, they had each been reduced to the bare, stubborn fact of surviving. And now, here they were on the same porch, in the same morning light, with work still to do and damage still to repair, and a future that was not promised, but was at least possible. Reed looked east, where the plain stretched flat and open toward the iron frontier. At the far edge of the tree line, the pale shape stood one last time, still, patient, exactly as it had been outside Marek in the rain, and again at the farm's edge on the first quiet night. It did not move toward them. It did not threaten. It simply stood and watched, the way an ancestor watches from a distance when they are finally satisfied with what they see. Then the morning light reached the trees, and the shape was gone, leaving nothing behind but the sound of wind through the pines and the slow, certain feeling that something long unsettled had, at last, come to rest.